Good evening, everyone. Whether you're on YouTube, listening to us on whatever your favorite podcast app might be, your streaming platform du jour, welcome. It is Tuesday, October 17th. I am Matt Harris, nominally the basketball editor at Rock Game Nation. And today we have a Sam Snellingless episode of Dive Cuts. This is going to go probably as terribly as your mind can conceive. Sam is in Chicago with the missus, doing good husband things, celebrating, I think, her birthday. Probably eating at a really fancy restaurant. Probably sipping a 30-year-old stout from a very fancy glass and saying it's not as good as side project. But I am here tonight handling the hosting duties, and to my left, or to my right, I should say, or over here on the screen, is Mr. Matt Watkins joining me from the fine suburban landscape of St. Louis this evening. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're in the part of the year where we're getting actual sort of tidbits. It's tidbit season, as I like to say it. It's media polls are coming out. We're seeing analytic sites releasing preseason kind of, I guess what I would say, rankings. And guys are getting in practice gyms. They're talking to guys with microphones. They're saying their coaches like their dad. Their teammates are like their brothers. And this is just one big family atmosphere that's going to pervade throughout the year, even when they get to January and they're fighting to stay at 500. So it's that time of year. So but basketball's an eye. We're running previews. We're doing all kinds of stuff. So I think it's pretty good. I wanted to start off by saying we've had Mizzou Media Day in the last couple of days. They all showed up to the Albrecht family practice gym yesterday, I think. And, there were many players there. I think all of them were there, which, sometimes there's always a few stragglers that don't manage to get to the door, or some guys are given leave, if they have class. But apparently every guy showed up. All the coaches were there. Dennis Gates held court. And, this is going to be sort of a free-flowing thing. The one that stood out to me is I didn't really see a dominant sort of theme from the day yesterday. I think a lot of it was sort of what we would say is cliched, but, as you sort of like tried to parse, the content and sort of the messaging that the program was sending out yesterday, did anything stand out to you, sort of from the affair yesterday?
Not really. I mean, I guess I've been around long enough to read the off-season coverage and the preseason media days. Everyone's going to play faster. The chemistry's great. Going to score a lot more points. Things are looking up. We're excited about the season. We're looking ahead to March, blah, blah, blah. There were some specifics from Mizzou in there, a few things that caught my eye that were actual details, but the general tenor of these things is, let's see when they play.
Right. I think the one thing that you and I sort of noticed was, I think, Dennis Gates saying, he would, if he could have 20 guys and run 4 teams, he would. And I think, that's sort of been, from our seat and how we sort of, in our wonky hats when we put them on, is we're always sort of looking at roster construction and depth and how these guys want to put the pieces together. And, there are 18 bodies right now, which is a lot. And some of these guys that are here could be ostensibly playing low major basketball or mid-major basketball somewhere else, like J.V. Brown, who is a preferred walk-on, had solid low major offers. Danny Stevens had low major offers. But Majak could probably be playing still, in like an OVC type of program. Caleb Brown went into the portal and, visited UTSA. To me, I think the question is going to be, is there too many bodies at a certain point? And just, I'm sort of curious, how he's going to, start to manage the expectations when you have this many cooks in the kitchen. So I didn't know if that struck you in any particular way, with Dennis saying he wants that many. He wants a whole 8th grade classroom, basically, in a practice gym.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of the things that stood out to me. And as far as this year's concerned, I don't really see it being much of a problem. Depending on how you count, we don't even know technically who the scholarship players are and if that even matters now. I mean, for all we know, Nick Honor could be a non-scholarship player.
Right.
He's going to probably lead the team in minutes. Do we call him a scholarship player or do we call him something else? But for my purposes, when you really look at the roster, there's 13, maybe 14 guys that you're looking at actually seeing the court, unless it's extreme mop-up duty.
Yeah.
And we'll see that throughout the year, when Ben Sternberg got in the games last year, that will happen. But as far as guys that are in the rotation, they're probably going to try and play 10, 11 guys on a nightly basis. So you're really only talking a flex of maybe 2 to 3 guys that aren't comfortable with the fact of sitting at the end of the bench, and guys who are actually going to be playing a lot. So this year, I don't see that being as a problem. But going forward, if you're taking 5-man freshman classes that are all top 100 players and you're trying to build a 20-man roster that way, that's when you're going to get into some problems about guys not being happy, guys wanting to get out, etc. So I think this year it's probably not going to be too big of an issue, maybe with the freshmen, but again, we won't know until we see them.
When I looked at it, going through the offseason, and I think, as we sort of did the number crunching and sort of tried to figure out the minute allocations, you really got to a top 7 pretty quickly there. I think the one thing that didn't come out yesterday was sort of what's the expectation for a guy like Aiden Shaw, who I think, to surprise some, might be closer to that cut line than you think when you really look at how the roster sets up at his position and sort of what they're going to be doing. A guy like Aiden Shaw may, have to fight and claw, presuming that jump, hasn't quite been as substantial as we think. Kurt Lewis is a guy who, if you read some national outlet, they're saying, oh, they got the JUCO player of the year. There's a world where Kurt Lewis is 8th or 9th in this rotation at this point. The first guy we wrote about, in the player preview, Zeus Carolero, may be a guy that's toward the back. So I think that's really what I was sort of looking at is, were there any sort of hints, teased out as, what sort of an early pecking order is going to look like. I think they're going to play a lot of guys early, but really hard to even kind of discern at this point, if they're tipping their hand on anything in the rotation.
Yeah, I haven't really seen it, and I've kind of kept an eye out for that because that's one of my pet projects in the off season is projecting all this stuff, and it's an exercise in futility. I like to think that I do better than most, but and Isaiah Mosley, who we expected to lead the team in minutes last year, played 19% of minutes, and Dre Golston swapped spots with him.
We were right about everything else pretty much, though. We were right
if we looked at it from a role perspective, we were 100% dead on. But as far as the player, things happen. You don't know. Everything else looked good, but that's a pretty big miss. So, I look at this year's roster and I agree with you that I don't see any way that there's not going to be kind of like a delineation between the top 7 and then the next group. And in that top 7, I think most of us would agree that Nick Honor, Noah Carter, John Tonje, Caleb Grill, Sean East, Tamar Bates, and Connor Vanover are probably going to make up that nucleus, not only because, I think they're the leaders at that position, but they're also the oldest guys on the team. That plays a role. And that doesn't mean that an Aiden Shaw or Trent Pierce, Kurt Lewis, or Jesus Carolero could jump into that next group. It's very possible. I just think that next group of 3 or 4 is less likely to get top 7 minutes than the group ahead of them. And the fact is, in whether it's the coaches speaking, whether it's the players speaking, or even us trying to do it, we look at a guy like Jesus Carolero and I see why they brought him in. And when I project him at a pretty low minute total, you're like, well, I could definitely see him playing more than that. Well, guess what? You got to take those minutes away from someone.
Yeah.
It's not just, you can't play, there's 200 minutes in a game. You can't play 250. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be getting a lot of technical fouls, I guess.
Yeah.
But so it's always a give and take.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is going to become a pressing question, now you're writing and working on a piece about it, is, the big thing I think that was touted yesterday was look at our depth, look at sort of the flexibility we have. You and I have really looked at the numbers and sort of tried to flex it. This offense can be hyper efficient. It can be hyper It can relieve a lot of sort of the playmaking duties from people. But what it doesn't have necessarily is kind of what I would say is that late clock option, or a guy that, as we saw against maybe Arkansas at home, or against Utah State, even to some degree against Alabama, where you just come down, run a simple slot ball screen, and let that guy go. They could do it with Kobe. They could do it to a degree with Dree, Zay when he was available. There were 3 or 4 guys that you could say, okay, we love running our Princeton stuff. We love running our shuffle stuff, but we need a bucket, and the offense is getting it for us. Let's give it to that guy. I don't know if this roster has that, and I don't think we're going to know a little bit, but I think there was anything coming out yesterday where it was, Gates, or even this, from what I saw from some assistants saying, oh yeah, we feel like this guy can go do that for us. I think that's very much an open question at this point.
Yeah, I think even if they did have that, and I'm not certain that they do, that's why I spent close to 3,000 words and numerous charts pecking out this piece that's going to drop before the season. But, a lot of the narrative around Mizzou was well earned that Dennis Gates ran an extremely good offense last year. He ran great stuff. They played up tempo. They shot it well. Everything. But, when we're watching games, and I'm not even really focusing on this so much in our film pieces after the game, but there were times, as you said, that the best offense was finding a mismatch, and generally it was Kobe, where there's either a guy that was too big or too small guarding him, and Mizzou just found a little bit of a creative way to get him the ball and just let him go to work.
Yeah.
And when you have a guy like that who can he's really hard to be matched up with, all of your offense falls into place because the opponent doesn't have anyone that can guard him. Now, when we got into games against Alabama, Texas A&M, and even Mississippi State to some extent, they were elite defensive teams, and Mizzou really couldn't do that. And as we saw, they suffered at times. Playing those really tall, long, athletic defenses. But, for the majority of the year, 85, 90% of the year, you're not going to be facing those teams, but you still need a guy like Dre Golston, or, we're not going to get into the whole Mosley thing, but a guy like that who can generate offense himself in a one-on-one format when your base offense and your transition is not netting points.
I was going to say, we spend a lot of time on the player previews. You on the front end doing a lot of the data work and doing sort of the projection work, me cutting the tape and putting it, sort of in a way that sort of accentuates different tendencies or different sort of schematic purposes that a guy might serve. As you went through, and I just wanted to sort of throw this open because we're in the middle of doing them now, you can kind of look back and breathe a little bit now that your part's done. Were there any sort of things that struck you about this rotation, about this roster construction, having gone through and looked at every guy's role and tried to project it? Was there anything that you were sort of surprised by, or that kind of made you go, and made you pause? I'm always sort of curious when we come out of this, did we learn anything new? I hate for us to just affirm our own suspicions, but I didn't know if there was anything that really stood out to me.
No, I know what you're saying. And, obviously I learned a lot of new stuff about the transfers coming in, and I believe after tomorrow, all of those pieces will be out. So you'll get a good feel for that. So I wasn't really surprised by anything there, I guess. Connor Vanover, I will say that I've mentioned this in the piece, and I've talked with various people about that. Anytime his name comes up, it's kind of like, and I get it. I mean, what was it? January of 2021.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Tillman had a career game, and Connor Vanover was on the receiving end of that. And I get why that's your impression of Connor Vanover. And I don't think it's fair, but I get it.
Yeah.
He's a good player. He's an efficient player. He's not going to be your number one guy. And when you look at him being 7'5", he's not a back to the basket, down low, banging around dude. He's I don't want to call finesse, but he's a stretch big. And I think in Mizzou's offense that fits well. But to answer your question, I think the biggest thing, at least it's not a surprise, but looking at Nick Honor, he's going to have to step it up as far as his involvement in the offense. And he did great in his role last year. He didn't need to step it up anymore. And what I mean by that is he had a 13.4% usage rate, if I
Yeah.
recall, 13.4,
Yeah.
13.6. And basically, to put that in context, is that if you had an even balance on the team of your 5 players on the floor, they'd all have a 20% usage rate.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen. You have guys that are a little bit more heavy usage. Trey Golston was at 25, for example, but 13.4%. And a lot of it is owed to him never turning the ball over. So credit to him there. But
Yeah.
that's just not enough for a team that's going to rely on balance. He's going to have to be more of a creator offensively. And I think he can be. He has been in the past. At Clemson, his usage rates were between like 17.5 and 20%. So he's done that at a high major level. But that was probably the most shocking thing from a statistical standpoint, that like, man, we really need to get him involved. And I believe yesterday I saw a quote come out that said either he or someone else said he needs to shoot more. And yes.
The one thing that I will say is, like, I was going back through kind of the film from last year, and I put it in different buckets, and then sort of like, I basically outline it within the file tabs. He wasn't really used a lot in what I would say are Missouri's like go-to actions. Wasn't used a lot in delay action, where they throw the ball to a big at the top of the key. Was almost never really involved in sort of that pinch post stuff. Where he got involvement was if Mizzou decided we're going to try and just either run variations of 5 out or some pistol action, and we can get him moving side to side. We can get the ball swinging. We can flow into some DHOs or some handoffs. He can hunt. He can read. I think where his strength is, he understands what he wants to do when he turns the corner. Not going to blow you away, but he can find a crease and get to it. And strong enough and sturdy enough to absorb contact. Understands when guys are playing drop coverage and can get to a pull-up. Knows when a guy is sinking under the ball screen and can shoot it. You see really good reads being made there, but a lot of what Missouri did in those situations is we're going to have Kobe as the screener, and we're going to slip it. The one thing that's going to be really interesting that I saw a lot of today was a lot of Noah Carter in him in those 5 out actions. Now, Missouri's never going to be an exclusively high pick and roll ball, club, but I think there are things you can do with those two and some 2-man game to really get him involved. So I think that there's stuff when you go back and look at the film, you see little threads that the staff can pull at. I think that's sort of what stood out to me about watching these guys is, Noah Carter knew he was a great cutter, better cutter than I remember last year. Almost never used in pinch post actions. Almost hardly ever got touches in that spot of the floor.
Right.
Forget even, facilitating. Can he score consistently? Are they even going to use him in those spots? Almost no real consistent usage for Aiden Shaw, as we knew after non-con. The one thing that I did like about Sean East is I think if you get him into some 5 out stuff where the reads are simple, where it's read the roller, read the low defender on the box, and look wide, he can make the right pass. He can make good decisions in that spot. So you see some strengths to this group that are sort of coming out, but I think you do a great job projecting and looking at how the guys are going to fill in statistically. I think the hard part for me is it's not just a guy they can throw the ball to offensively and function, independent of what they're running offensively. Who's going to fill that sort of prime slot? Because Dree could even play in those elbow actions at times. Who's going to fill in those spots there? We're not going to know until games tip, but I think that's sort of the lingering thing as we move into non-con in a couple of weeks. We also got other news. We talk about the SEC here too. We got the SEC poll today, and not really a ton of surprises up and down the board. Tennessee is picked first. I'm trying to get it pulled up right now if I can get it into the SEC media poll and sort it in my sheet here. Our number 1 team is Tennessee, not a shock. Texas A&M at number 2, not a surprise. Arkansas at 3rd, not a shock. I mean, Kentucky 4th, Alabama 5th, Auburn 6th, Mississippi State 7th, Florida 8th, Missouri in 9th, Ole Miss 10th, Vanderbilt 11th, Georgia 12th. And this is sort of the one modest surprise. I'll say very, very modest. LSU in 13th. I was sort of surprised to see LSU in 13th. Not surprised to see South Carolina in 14th. That is, if there's two polls of consensus here, it's Tennessee first, South Carolina last. And then everyone seems to agree that Ole Miss is going to finish 10. It really is sort of some unity there. I didn't know if there was anything that really jumped out to you about sort of where, the pecking order that's set down here. I think we track it, but you never know until all the votes are tabulated. I didn't know if there was anything that really caught your eye.
I don't really think so. I mean, LSU, a lot of that's probably due to Matt McMahon's first year going really off the rails and then finishing 14th with one or two conference wins. Yeah. They were competitive in a lot of games, but you lose a guy like Adam Miller, you lose KJ Williams. You lose two good scorers off a really bad team, you're probably going to be picked at the bottom. Same thing with South Carolina. You lose a first-round draft pick. Gigi did go first round, didn't he?
Second.
No matter. You lose your best player and you finish bottom 4 in the league, you're probably going to be picked there. At the top, I really do like Buzz Williams. I'm probably in a minority on that among Mizzou faithful dating back to 2009, but I think he's a really good coach. But man, I just do not know if I'm a buyer on the Aggies.
They got a wide swing, man. They got a wide swing.
I mean, even last year they were terrible in the non-conference.
Yeah.
And then they really turned it on. They have a good defense. They're always going to be very good on that end. So the floor is there. I mean, they're not going to be a bad team. But it's just sometimes it's a bear watching them put the ball in the basket. So, even a team like Tennessee, who doesn't run beautiful offense, they run 1950s style offense. They still generally can put points on the board pretty efficiently. But Texas A&M, sometimes if they're not knocking down outside shots, it can be awful, awful stuff to watch.
Their best offense is going to the glass. It's going to the glass. I think the hard part that you run into with A&M is that Missouri's model is possession-based, where they want to turn you over. They want to play in transition. A&M, to a certain degree, is that way. Not as high tempo. They want to get out and they want to grind the pace and then force turnover and then score against you. And then they're going to try and just white knuckle it and get on the glass. That's a pretty narrow margin for error. And A&M had some games last year where they were able to tip it and it worked pretty well. They're also not going to have a guy like Dexter Dennis, who's a fantastic on-ball defender, help generate a lot of those turnovers. I can see why A&M has a little bit more variability. Tennessee brings back, I think, 3rd or 4th most production. They recruited a top 10 level every year. They went and got Dalton Connect, who supposedly should give them a wing scorer, although we know he's pretty good. But we also know that sometimes that jump in conference level can be tough. I'm really, really fascinated by what Kentucky does without functional big men early on, and in a sport that has really trended towards experience. But the days of just slotting Kentucky number 1 are over. They're 4th now. The one team that I think I'm probably lower on than most is Auburn. Personally, when we did our picks, I had Auburn in 9th. I'm sure I'm going to have memes in my mentions with laser eyes. So that's going to be fun if this filters its way back to the Plains. But I don't know if I trust the guards in Auburn. Katie Johnson is not who I think of when I think of prudent offensive initiation and creation. They've got a top 50. They got a 5-star freshman coming in, but who's more of a scoring point. They've added Denver Jones, who's a guy coming from FAU. I think they were 210th in
FIU.
FIU, yeah. And
not the good one.
Not the good one. Yeah, they kept everybody there. They wanted to stay in Boca. And then Chad Baker-Mazara, JUCO wing. Don't know if I love that composite backcourt. A lot of depth pieces back. Janai Broom's a really, really good big. I think it's right to have him as an all-conference pick. But man, Bruce, has earned some equity, but I don't know if I think he's pushing it with this backcourt this year.
Yeah, I think had you, instead of trading Aiden Holloway, their freshman point guard, for Wendell Green, and instead toss Katie Johnson, I'd probably be a little bit higher.
Yeah.
I'm higher on Green than I am on
Katie, yeah.
On Katie. Katie is like a mix of JT Tiller and I don't even know what. JT Tiller was way more composed. But he plays with that same, I'm just going 100 miles an hour no matter what happens. And if you take away any sense of responsibility with the ball, that's kind of what you're getting with one of your main point guards, which, in the right system and with the right guys around him can work. Last year, it really didn't. They'll be a good defensive team, I think, and a lot of it will be dependent on how Holloway comes around. And if he's, what's the point guard that was there a few years back, the freshman on their probation year?
Oh, I can't remember. Sam asked me this last weekend. I couldn't remember.
Well, anyway, that guy really made a difference on their team as a freshman.
Yeah.
I should have been more prepared on Auburn, I guess. Auburn of multiple years ago. But Bruce has had good guards, and that's always a possibility. But I agree with you. I don't see them as a team really fighting for a bye or a double bye in the SEC tournament.
Florida will be interesting. Sam and I talked about them last week, losing a 4-man. The only other real news I think we're going to wait for is probably Ole Miss and LSU waiver decisions. Still no puffs of white smoke from the NCAA conclave on that, but 80% reject rate makes me think they should be planning to not have any of those guys on the roster. The only other thing I would say is it's a pretty bland preseason all-SEC team. The first team is Grant Nelson of Alabama, transferred from North Dakota State. Trevin Brazil coming off a knee injury at Arkansas, but has sufficient buzz to land on the team. Janai Broom, who we just talked about. Justin Edwards, a freshman sort of, hybrid 3-4 wing atop a lot of draft boards right now. He'll be at Kentucky. Tolu Smith. These votes were cast before the foot issues came up. Santiago Vescovi, who is still here, and
he's older than I am.
Yeah, people were shocked that Wade Taylor was still around. Wade Taylor's a junior, so Vescovi's got 2 years on him. The second team is Mark Sears of Alabama, Devo Davis from Arkansas. A big breakout candidate on a lot of lists this year is Riley Kugel of Florida. He's there. Antonio Reeves is back in Kentucky. That we do know that he's back. He made that decision. And then Zakai Ziegler, who's coming off a knee injury. Just kind of a weird list. We've got a couple of transfers. We've got some guys coming back from injury. We've got a guy who is currently injured, but not really a surprise. All these guys, all 12 players, are from teams picked in the top 8. I think I told you before we started recruiting, the only modest omission I think is I would have put Matt Morrell somewhere on my list, and Tyron Lawrence closed really strong last year, really, and I think there were some durable gains there. But I understand why people don't, reach into the bottom, 4 or 5 to pick guys. But those are 2 guys that I think are really, really good players that, if I had to look at Antonio Reeves, I'd put Matt Morrell in that spot. Or, if I had to look at a Trevin Brazil, I might have done that. Just because, not that I don't think Trevin's a great player. I love Trevin Brazil. It's just, we don't know what we're going to get there yet. We don't know what he's going to look like.
Auburn, Arkansas, both coming after you now.
Okay. It's okay. It won't matter if I'm very polite in my critiques. They're still going to invade the mentions. So we'll see. Wade Taylor is the preseason player of the year, which just makes me feel great because, man, I love a guy who's just a chucker by nature being our POI candidate. It's going to be fantastic to watch that. Overall, though, I think the POI and the preseason teams reflect it's a league without like really strong names this year. I don't know.
Let me ask you this. If you had the opportunity to pick odds on the SEC Player of the Year coming from either the preseason first team or second team versus the field, like anyone not on that list, which bucket would you choose?
I'd take the field.
I think this year there's a good opportunity for that. I mean, these lists are good. We know all these guys except for Edwards at Kentucky. You know, we've seen most of these guys play. We know what they're capable of. They're all good players. But do I really see a guy on that list that's going to have a Brandon Miller type impact or even a Kobe Brown type impact on that group? I don't know, man. I just don't know.
No, and the thing about Taylor is that guy is just at times in non-con. There's non-con Wade Taylor and then there's conference Wade Taylor, where he can shoot you out of some games. So I think that's sort of the indicative of where we are here. Is there's not an Oscar Tshiebwe where we go, oh yeah, that's the preseason player of the year, or even like 3 or 4 guys on that first team where I feel really, really strongly about them.
I think Broom is probably the best opportunity in my estimation of that group to be player of the year. But, you know, again, if Auburn has kind of an underwhelming year, he's not going to be the player of the year. So,
yeah. And the thing about it is if Arkansas is in the contention, that's transfers. A lot of transfers again. If A&M's in contention, it's probably going to be Taylor. Kentucky, it's really even hard to tell just because they're going to, you know, it could be DeJuan Wagner's going to get a lot of usage. Edwards is going to get a lot of usage. Reeves wouldn't be back if he didn't think he was going to have a prominent role. Alabama is a weird one because I think they're going to have like 4 mid-major transfers, and they're starting 5 are going to, and they're likely starting 5. So that's a kind of weird one. Broom there. It's a year where I think egalitarian is probably the best way to describe roster construction across this conference. There's not a lot of headliners. It's probably going to be, you know, what kind of group do you have? Which that's good if you're Missouri. It's good if you're Missouri. You know, if your core and your group can function well, and you know you're not playing teams with a lot of alphas, that opens a little bit of a path. Right. So that's pretty good.
I think there's a lot of good teams in this league, and I don't know that there's a great one, but we didn't know Alabama would be great last year either, and I would put them into that category. So, you know, you don't know until the games start going that what you really have.
Tennessee's bringing up the rear in the top 10, usually 7 to 10. And, you know, if you look at where they are, in, you know, way absurdly too early bracketology, I can't even believe I'm saying it. October 17th. I hate myself right now. Tennessee's being projected like a 3 or 4 seed,
something like that.
Like this is a league that, you know, I think this is probably a good segue too, is its projected adjusted efficiency margin in KenPom is 16.39. It hasn't been that they have not finished a season as a league with that high of a mark, anything close to that since 2007. Which is weird because like we just said, this is a league where I look around, I don't see loaded rosters. So it's a really strange sort of year where there's a lot of good teams. There could be strength kind of maybe up and down the lineup to the where maybe you are the second best conference in the country, but you have no dominant team going into March. So and there's no like real face of the league as a player. It's a really sort of not weird, but it's just a different year for us as we sort of get ready and get geared up. But on KenPom, we were having fun looking at the release on KenPom Sunday.
It was good.
It was KenPom considered the gold standard, the oldest, I would say probably the most respected, the most venerated. Not a lot of surprises in spots 1 through 10. Realistically, a lot of sort of consensus with some other outlets like Evan Maya, you know, Eric Haslam, you know, and Bart Torvik. But when they got into the bottom 4, Georgia is the 11th team is picked to finish 11th, essentially, in Kim Palm's model. They're 57th in Kim Palm. That is, their next highest rating is in Eric Haslam's metrics at 84th. Mm-hmm. South Carolina is 66th. Its next highest rating is Evan Maya at 89th. Vanderbilt is 79th. It's the only one that is sort of in the ballpark. And then there's Ole Miss, which is picked to finish dead last in Kim. They're 82nd. But after that, it's 31 spots away. Their next lowest pick is Evan Maya at 51. I spent at least an hour and a half looking through my returning production, looking through recruiting stuff, looking at weights, and I don't know how we got here, Mr. Watkins. I don't know how this happened, but it's blowing my mind. And
yeah,
that's sad, but it's blowing my mind.
The thing is, like with Georgia and South Carolina, I'm a believer in the numbers. They're going to change. These are projections. They're not set in stone.
Right.
Kim Pomeroy isn't sitting in his basement looking at all these numbers, said, I'm going to put Mizzou 55th and watch this. It's not how it works.
No.
But part of the system is that they do look at past program history, recent history. And when you look at South Carolina, Georgia, and even Mizzou, those teams underwent a coaching change a year ago. So your sample set for these past 3 or 5 years, whatever he chooses, includes a first year of a new head coach and the last year of a guy who got fired.
Yeah.
So it's going to be wonky. So that's why I was very surprised with you, how South Carolina can be projected as someone competing to be on a bubble team when they were absolute garbage a year ago.
And they returned the most production in the conference, and they have the 10th best transfer class. It makes no sense. I don't know. Yeah. It boggles the mind. And like the transfers they got weren't coming from elite programs either. Talon Cooper and Minnesota weren't dicing people up in the Big Ten. Wofford was down in the SoCon. This was not, Miles Stute might be their best pickup, and he came from Vanderbilt. So there was nothing that really stood out to me that made me go, what are the variables here?
And I think at least if nothing else, it's a positive for Mizzou and the rest of the league. This is way too verbose to really get into here, but the Big 12 has always been favored by Kim Pomeroy in the last few years.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with all their programs are consistently good. So they're, when he builds the baseline for these initial projections, which the rest of the year builds off of, you're starting with teams that are all really good.
Yeah.
So when you get into conference play, or rated really good, so when you get into conference play, instead of playing the last place team being in the 40s or 50s in Kim Pomeroy in the Big 12, you're playing in the 80s or 90s. That has a cascading effect on the rest of the schedule, your strength of schedule, your adjusted efficiency margin. So when you're starting out high and your strength of schedule that's incorporated throughout the remainder of the season until it eventually filters out. But I still think there's some sort of lasting effect in the strength of schedule component that these baselines play into. And I don't think that had anything to do with where Mizzou was, for our listeners. That was entirely different. Mizzou couldn't defend last year. That's the fact.
Yeah, Missouri.
One close games they couldn't defend. That's why they're ranked where they were. But as far as an entire conference, I think the Big 12 has gotten a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Not that it really matters in the grand scheme of things, but you still have to win games to get into the tournament.
Yeah.
Kim Pomeroy's secondary when it comes to resume. But I think it's good that Mizzou and the SEC might be having that effect this year, as mind-numbing as it is that South Carolina could be considered a top. What did you say they were, a 70 team?
Yep, top 70, 66th. And
yeah, I don't see it, but whatever.
Like, people are like, you guys just look at numbers. I'm like, no, we watched South Carolina. I experienced Lamont Paris's year one on at least 5 occasions. That was not a good basketball team.
It was,
but
and they probably played their best game of the year against Mizzou.
Probably one of them, or up there with Alabama is probably one of their best ones. And they beat
whatever
Kentucky.
1 or 2 games they won.
Yeah, it beat Kentucky. The other thing I would say to folks is don't freak out about where the numbers are. I usually don't. The numbers are sort of like a bait. I think you put it better on Twitter. They're a baseline starting point for us. I always look at where Missouri sits within the pecking order of the SEC. I average all the sort of, analytic numbers out, do the ranges. Missouri's sitting at 46.3 is its average in, across the 4, sort of metrics or outlets at this point. Historically, that's bubble territory. That's the 9th best average in the conference. That's bubble territory. You look at the SEC media poll, they were 9th. You look at the AP poll that came out, Missouri's not in the poll, but of the SEC teams that picked up points, they were 8th.
Right.
What I would say to people is don't get locked in on the game-by-game outcomes and say, oh, they predict us to go 2-12. Don't look at that. The probabilistic numbers are going to get better as the data starts to input. Look at the bottom numbers and look at where Missouri is in relation to everybody else. And then, ask yourself, okay, if we lost our 4 top scorers, 3 starters, and you're 9th in returning production, to enter the year, in a year where the model says that this should be potentially an 8-bid league, to be 9th is a really, really good spot for where this program is.
I think it's fair. I don't know. I did mention this on Twitter today. I don't know that I agree with it, but I think it's absolutely fair. There's nothing outrageous about Mizzou being picked somewhere between 7th and 10th. It's just it's a strong league. There's a lot of jumbling in the middle. I don't even know if there's a clear top of the league. The bottom is probably better than it was a year ago. So a lot of this is variable. I wouldn't pick them 13th, like whatever publication that was whatever. But, I just want to put this out there, and I've said it before, but the analytic numbers, the Ken Pomeroy, the Bart Torvik, the Eric Haslam, if you disregard them as a ranking system and instead look at them as a system that puts a betting line on teams, Vegas, that's what he's doing. It's a power poll. Where would Mizzou, as if the season opened up today, how would they be favored against or favored for or favored against any team in the land?
Yeah.
And that's all it is. And once there's more data, it changes. So if Mizzou's 55th and they come out and they beat Arkansas Pine Bluff by 100 points and they beat Memphis by 20, guess what? They're going to be up in the 30s like that.
Look at these splits.
Maybe even higher. It moves. It's a learning system and it projects forward. It doesn't care what you've done in the past except to inform your projections moving forward. So don't get bent out of shape about it. It's a great thing. It's a great tool. It's the fact that it's public and he charges a subscription fee of $20 to have access to volumes of data. It's a great resource, but take it for what it is. NCAA tournament is not picking this team over this team because their Ken Pom rankings higher, even though the other team has a better resume. It just doesn't happen.
No. And the one thing I would say too that we've always talked about is I always use Ken Pom as descriptive. It helps you describe how your team plays. When you look at all the numbers, it was pretty obvious last year. Why is Missouri, with all these great offensive numbers, why is it 55th? Well, look at that red dot on its defensive efficiency rating and look at its rebounding rate. Missouri is fantastic on offense. It cannot get a stop defensively, and it gets beat up on the glass. That's what it's telling you. And now, if you think that that's crap and that the system is screwed up, whatever, I'm not going to argue that with you. But it's telling you, it's describing to you how Missouri is playing basketball. And I can back this up, if you go put on the tape, and if you go like Missouri had one of the worst defensive ratings on open catch and shoots last year and gave up the most of them. If you go put on the tape, Missouri's giving up a lot of open catch and shoots. So it's accurately describing how Missouri is playing.
Yeah.
Missouri went, flipped 3 games. Missouri's description, of how they played was probably 8th or 9th. You take 3 makes off the board, they're a 9-win team. How replicable is our 3 buzzer beaters? Ken Pom was, and all these sites were accurately describing how Missouri was playing. But to your point, they don't look back. They don't look back and say, "Oh, that was a great shot by Dree. I'm going to give you 3 points."
And he did it twice. So you're
like, the one thing I would tell people is Ken Pom has a thing called luck, which is probably not the best.
Terrible name for it. Terrible
name. It's a terrible name for variance, is really what it is. Missouri had the 10th highest variance from the forecasted outcome in the country last year. That means there were, if you plugged in all the numbers and you did the betting line, which Watkins is out sort of described here, Missouri defied that betting line 10 times. It was 10th in the country defying betting lines.
In the positive. Yeah.
In the positive. I can go put on the tape and show you 3 or 4 games. The rally against LSU at LSU, the rally at home against Ole Miss, the rally on the road at Wichita State, and 3 last-second shots. 6 games right there where traditionally you would not win those games. The probabilistics will probably be 50-50 in those chances usually.
I don't even think you need to look at the rallies. You just look at Central Florida and Tennessee buzzer beaters. I mean, those are incredibly low percentage shots in games that Mizzou was not only not winning, they were trailing. So if those shots don't go in, the game is over.
Yeah,
but also the Wichita State game you mentioned, Mizzou had a great play that Dennis Gates spent, I think, an hour at Tiger Talk diagramming that got him a shot to tie the game. I believe Hodge hit 1 of 2 free throws.
Yeah.
Wichita State had a runner from 6 feet that did not go down at the end of regulation. Yeah. If that shot goes down, that's 3 games right there. Right. Just, if you're 6 inches one way or the other. And how do you look at the season? Mizzou's a bubble team.
Yeah. And
it's just the way it is.
So when we look at the preseason, what we really try and do is, I think for me, it's always, what's Mizzou what were they bad at and where do they project them to improve?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these analytic models are predicting Missouri to make, some cases, Haslam's got them making like a massive jump in defensive efficiency, like over 100 spots, 50 or 60 spots in defensive efficiency.
Yeah.
That's a absurdly good improvement on the defensive end. But they're also going to probably sink to around a top 25 level on offense. So all this stuff is pushing and pulling. They're going to be better on defense, probably a little bit worse on offense. And I don't think they're going to go 9-1 in 2-score games again.
No. So I think with Pomeroy, they had 18 2-possession games projected, and he has them going 7-11 in those games.
Yep.
There's not going to be 18 2-possession games. They're not going to go 7-11. I don't know what they're going to go. But last year they won 90% of those games. That's how you got up to a 25-win team. This year, we don't know. Maybe they do it again. Odds are that it probably won't happen. I mean, there's very few, if any, coaches that year in, year out are incredible in one-position games. Bill Self probably is up there, and I don't think it's all due to his own doing, playing his home games in Lawrence. Just saying it's a thing. But, that's how much this stuff matters, the close games. Mizzou's season rapidly changed based on those wins. The only close game they lost last year was at Arkansas when they led big in the first half, basically got blown out in the second half, and then came back and chipped away a little and never really had a chance to win it.
Yeah.
Every other game they lost, it was not pretty.
No.
These were decisive defeats.
Yeah. And that, as we documented last spring, that dragged on their net rating. So what we keep coming back around to is these systems, as you look at them as descriptive as to how Missouri's playing. It's trying to tell you how this team is functioning. When you get to March, they're going to weigh that against, to a certain extent, if you have a similar resume to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But as you documented last year and as you document every year, the organizing principle really is, net quad one wins. It's a pretty straightforward system. These things only come into play when you have played to a certain level or you are having to compare teams head to head. But we'll see when we get there. But
only point on that is I'm not going to give away my whole bag of tricks on this, but looking at this really close last year, I weighted the resume metrics, which are a measure of how you've done against what teams you've played, and takes no account for how much you beat them by, anything like that. But where you played them, who you beat, those were significantly more impactful in where seeds or teams ended up, whether they made the tournament, whether they didn't, where they got seeded, versus Ken Pomeroy. Mizzou was an outlier. Ken Pomeroy would not have had them in the tournament. ESPN BPI would not have had them in the tournament. Net would have been close, if not in the tournament, and they ended up a 7 seed. Maybe they're a 6 seed if things go better in the metrics, but at that point, what difference does it make? You got to win a game against a lower seeded team, and then you're going to get a higher seeded team in the second round.
And if you, to your point, if you correlate net, if you correlate all these things and you put them in a spreadsheet, you run base correlations and you do even a 5% error p-test, it's quality wins, it's resume metrics.
Right.
Like this stuff,
100%.
At the end of the day, what you should care about in March when you look at the net is telling you how your team played in assessing and putting together its resume. And the committee's only going to care about it if you get into a situation where it's, we got Creighton and Missouri on a seed line battle. Let's really dig into the nitty gritty here.
Right.
Missouri, they had maybe they have comparable schedules. Missouri didn't play quite as well. We're going to give the nod to Creighton. That's how granular it's got to get. So again,
absolutely,
going into the season, our long PSA here is use these as a baseline, use them to help set a loose pecking order in your head. And as you check in during the year, it's just going to tell you how Missouri's playing. So that's all I got on that point.
I think we beat it to death.
I think we beat it to death, Watkins. We've done it. They didn't tell me how to use the spreadsheet thing, so we couldn't show that one guy all the spreadsheets. We're sorry about that. But we have a feeling after listening and watching us talk about this, you all are grateful. You all are very, very grateful. But Watkins, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else?
Nope. I think that just about does it. I think we've given our listeners something to chew on, and they're, the Alabama and Auburn, and I guess Auburn and Arkansas fans.
I put them all to sleep. I put them all to sleep.
Swarming your inbox.
Not going to come in. The only PSA we have is Sam's. Team previews are rolling out. Those are fantastic every year, Sam. It's probably one of the major reasons I came to the site. You're not going to have a guy who's watching South Carolina's freshmen in YouTube cut-ups and trying to tell you how Colin Murray Boyles is playing. Sam legitimately does the legwork on these. He puts in the time. He's thoughtful with them. He's as objective going through the process as possible. So it's a fantastic resource. It really helps inform what we do throughout the year. Those have started. South Carolina was on Monday, and then Georgia dropped today, and then another one will drop tomorrow on October 18th. They'll be rolling out every day. This guy over here and we are probably about a third of the way through player previews. We've just finished the transfers. We will start to get into the returners soon. Can't say enough for what Matt does. Really makes the job easy. Really cares about projecting this stuff. Really puts in the thought with it. Has reached out and talked to people inside the program as well to try and get feedback on what we're thinking. It's really, really important to us that when you read this stuff, you're seeing as complete a picture as possible. So those are rolling out right now. We've got beat writers, Jaden and Parker, who are showing up and talking to people. Those young bucks are doing the hard work and sparing us and letting us sit in basements and talk about metrics. So read their stuff. They're doing really, really great work. And overall, just keep coming to the site. We appreciate your work. We appreciate everything you guys do to support us. And with that, I think I'm going to get out of here. Does that sound good, Watkins?
Love it.
Awesome. We will see you all next week. And Sam will talk about bourbon and put you all to sleep. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. Beep. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.